Hello, welcome everybody to our uh, best novel panel for the Edgars 2022. We're very excited to have everyone here. Just a few notes of housekeeping before we begin. There will be links to the panelists' books posted in the chat. We encourage you to uh, visit and purchase all of these books. Books tonight will be provided by the Raven Bookstore in Lawrence, Kansas, home of the Jayhawks, this year's NCAA basketball champions, and my alma mater. So, little shout out there. As we go through tonight, please feel free to submit questions in the chat and Q&A boxes. You can watch the Edgar Awards live streamed on April 28th on our YouTube channel. Please follow us on social at hashtag Edgars2022 to see videos of all of our authors, and you can find the calendar of upcoming Edgar panels on our website at mysterywriters.org and at theedgars.com. And our moderator this evening is Kate Flora. Kate Flora's fascination with people's criminal tendencies began in the Maine Attorney General's office. Deadbeat dads, people hurting their kids, and employers' discrimination aroused her curiosity about human behavior. The author of 24 books and many short stories, Flora's been a finalist for the Edgar, Agatha, Anthony, and Derringer Awards. She won the Public Safety Writers Association Award for Nonfiction and twice won the Maine Literary Award for Crime Fiction. Flora writes two series, the Joe Burgess Police Procedural series and the Thea Kosak series. Her nonfiction focuses on aspects of public safety officers' experience, including two true crimes, a game warden's co-written memoir, and a book about police shootings. And with that, I am happy to turn over this evening's events to Kate. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I welcome everybody. I see that Sean has appeared, which is wonderful. And I am very happy to welcome all of the mysterious people out there in the stratosphere who are joining us tonight. I've been doing panels for probably about 28 years, and this is the most daunting one that I've ever had to moderate. So I'm in awe of these writers, and I hope by the end of this panel, you will share some of my awe. Our panelists tonight are, and as you just saw, it's very hard to read anybody's bio and do a decent job of it. So I'm going to do a half-up job of it, starting with Reese Bowen, who is the New York Times best-selling author of 2 historical mystery series, as well as several internationally best-selling standalone novels, including the Venice Sketchbook. Her works are translated into over 30 languages, and she has won 20 major awards to date. Reese is a transplanted Brit who now divides her time between California and Arizona. S.A. Cosby, and I'm going to call him Sean because I just want to, is an Anthony Award-winning writer from southeastern Virginia. He is the author of the New York Times best-selling Razorblade Tears and Blacktop Wasteland, which won the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, was the New York Times notable book, and was named a Best Book of the Year by NPR, The Guardian, and Library Journal, among others. When not writing, he is an avid hiker and chess player. A former bar owner and criminal defense investigator and an English teacher, James Kestrel is now an attorney practicing throughout the Pacific. His writing has won advanced praise from Stephen King, James Patterson, Dennis Lehane, Lee Child, Meg Gardner, James Fallows, Pico Iyer, and numerous other authors. A sailor and world traveler, Kestrel has lived in Taiwan, New Orleans, and a West Texas ghost town. He lives in Hawaii. Will Leach is a contributing editor at New York Magazine and writes weekly for the magazine Intelligencer and Vulture. He also writes regularly for NBC News, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Medium, and MLB.com, and is the founder of the late sports website Deadspin. He lives in Athens, Georgia with his wife and 2 sons. How lucky is his 5th book. Kat Rosenfield is a freelance pop culture and political writer and the Edgar-nominated author of Amelia Ann is Dead and Gone and Inland, a former reporter for MTV News. Her work has appeared in outlets including Wired, Vulture, Entertainment Weekly, Playboy, Reason, and Unheard. Okay, so you see what I mean about an astounding panel that we have here tonight. It is really a wonderful thing to have gone through the process of reading these books and come down to the 5 finalists and to actually see them tonight. I say almost in person. So I think I'll start out, sort of with the good old fashioned inspiration or imagination question, and we'll go in the alphabetical order that you just went. So Reese first. Why this book? Why Venice?
Oh, I wish I'd changed my name to Valensky. Then I would have been last. That would have been much better.
You're a pro, my dear.
I know, but well, it was interesting because there were several starting points for this book. First of all, we were shut down with a pandemic, and Venice is one of my favorite places. So I found myself looking at my photos that I'd taken over the years, and there were several driving points. My aunt was an incredible Italiophile, and she used to spend every Easter in Venice. And I remember thinking as a romantic teenager, why does she go to Venice every year? Why not Rome? Why not Florence? And I thought, what if she meets a man there? What if she has a life we know nothing about? And then the time I was in Venice, I was attending the Biennale, which is the big art festival that's held in the gardens. And I had the program and I was looking at it. And I saw that the Biennale had been held in 1940 and 1942. And I thought, that's the middle of a world war. Who came? I mean, how can you have an international art festival when the world is at war? And I thought, this is incredible. The Venetians love their art so much that they held it in the middle of a world war when nobody could come. So Venice has always been a special place in my life. When I was a child, my parents would rent a little villa in Treviso, which is just outside. They'd drive in, they'd park, and they'd give my brother and me some money and say, see you at 5 o'clock. So we would wander the streets, know where the best gelato, go swimming at the Lido. And when I went back years later, it just all came back to me. I took my daughter when she graduated from high school, and I'd go, now, if you go through this little tunnel here and you cut through, she'd go, you can't go there, that's someone's backyard. And I go, just you wait. We'd come around and I go, see, and we'd come out exactly where I wanted. So it's one of those places, it doesn't matter how many times you go there, it's magical. And, when I went back, when I was doing the research, that was fabulous too, because I could trace every step I wanted my heroine to take. So I've probably talked for long enough, so I'll shut up.
Thank you very much. Sean, so a sense of place, I think, is one of the, and we've talked about Venice, but a sense of place is really something that's sort of critically important in all of these books. You write about a place that probably is well known to you and not so well known to us. Tell us about that as an inspiration. Is he not here? He's muted. Oh, unmute yourself. Your mic is muted. There we go. There you are.
My wife would probably say that's a great thing. Yeah, my wife probably wish she had a mute button in real life. Yeah, where I write about is southeastern Virginia, the Carolinas. I like to say that Virginia is my heart and my home. I'm a Southern boy, but I'm not what a lot of people expect or think of as a Southerner. And I use my writing to talk about the place that I love, because I love it, though, I reserve the right to criticize it or critique it, to paraphrase James Baldwin. And so the South is I think, an interesting and incredibly complex region to write about. Of course, all of us English majors know Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor and Ernest J. Gaines and so many other great Southern writers. But I think the one thing that influences my writing the most is a comment from Flannery O'Connor, where she said, the South is not, it's not Christ-centered, but it's Christ-haunted. And I think it's haunted by hypocrisy. And I think it's haunted by fear of the other. And so when I write about, the place where I grew up, the place where I live, it's with an eye toward confronting that hypocrisy. But, in my heart, there's no place I'd rather be than, down on the beach around a bonfire in the end of summer. So.
Wonderful. I have a million questions for all of you, but we'll just start and keep rolling. And Also, I think that Kathy told you at the beginning, and I'll tell you now, if you have questions for each other, you should feel free to jump in. So James Kestrel, I think, we clearly Hawaii and Hawaii's history, especially World War II history, plays an enormous role in your book. Tell me about the inspiration for this book, because you've written other books under a different name, and you changed your name for this book. Everyone wants to know why. And to tell us about your book.
Well, at the time that I got the idea for this book, it was before the pandemic, so I could still travel, and my job had me traveling a lot between Honolulu and Tokyo and Hong Kong. So I was in those two other cities a lot and spending a lot of time on airplanes. And one day I was just, I wanted to write a novel with a much bigger canvas than anything I had tried before. And I wanted to do something with these cities because they are so connected to each other through that history of World War II, Tokyo and Honolulu in particular. And one day I was just sitting on a plane, and I suddenly realized that if I had a detective and I could picture him in my mind, this character who could present this story and take us to all these places in the process of investigating a crime, I could do what I wanted to do. So the story just kind of grew from that idea.
Okay.
And do you want me to talk about why I wrote it under a pen name?
Well, people always wonder.
Oh,
and
well,
you've got a lot of people out here listening. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I had written 4 previous books that were published through Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, and they sold in the US a combined about 10 copies. And so no publisher would touch me. So I changed my name and fooled them.
Yes. Well, it was very clever, Well, good for you. I have many more questions for you, but now we are going to go to Will Leach. He has now told me how to pronounce his name properly.
Yes.
A sense of place, or a place, is terribly important in your book too, Will. How lucky, because the sort of the house, the street, the friend, the wheelchair, all of that is so, his life is so centered, and you are unmuted. Okay, great.
Yes.
Talk to me about the idea for that book, because that book is so different. I mean, all of your books are different, and that's what makes this year's selections so wonderful. But your protagonist is a very unusual one.
The book was originally the initial germ for the idea of the story was that my son's best friend has an affliction called spinal muscular atrophy, and so basically I spent a lot of time working with people who have the disease, and I spent a lot of time talking to them, and the thing I heard from them the most was like, it's really annoying that no one ever sees me. And every time I try to communicate with someone, they think that because I have this severe physical disability, they think that I am somehow mentally deficient, which would annoy anyone. And so I spent a lot of time talking to a lot of people. This is where the journalism part sort of came out. So I spent a lot of time talking to a lot of people with SMA, families with SMA. And I kind of got really obsessed with the idea of communication, and also, I can't speak for everyone else on here, but I feel like the last few years have been trying for a lot of people. And so the idea of a character who has, of a person who has suffered and has struggled and has had to face the worst of the world and has actually come out with it stronger and with a, I would say, relentlessly positive attitude about it, was something that I really felt like I kind of wanted to put in the world a little bit. So once I figured out who Daniel was, that was like, right, I have to find something for him to do. He cannot just sit and just blog for 400 pages. So that was when I kind of started with the idea where he would be, he would witness a crime, and not only being able to try to do something about it, but try to communicate in a world where it's increasingly difficult to communicate. And so putting it in Athens, Georgia, where I live, the thing I would love about Athens is it's a college town, but it's also an old music town. It's also a sports town. It's also like very rural, stop the steal sort of town. And so it has all of these different things all kind of compiling on one another. That to me was a pretty fascinating place to like set a story where a lot of different people, and he runs into a lot of different different viewpoints and personalities, I'd say.
Sure, sure. Okay. Last but certainly not least is Kat. And Kat, do I see you there up on the screen? Unmute yourself, Kat. Okay, great. As a loyal daughter of the state of Maine, I had to read your book, with the junkyard and the daughter and the town versus, people from away with, this very close scrutiny of, how did she do, So
How'd I
tell
do?
us, how did you do? You did okay. I didn't have to call the
Okay.
medical examiner and say, well, what do you think about this? All the things that we in small town Maine do. But this is as twisty a novel as any of us are probably ever going to read. And tell us how you came to that. And one thing I've failed to do with all of you is to get you to tell a little more of the story, but we will circle back to that.
So do you want me to talk about constructing the twists and turns?
How the book came to you, or how do you? If you could teach us how to construct those twists and turns, we would all be on the Edgar's list again next year.
Well, so the setting was very essential to the story. I have a lot of family ties and long ties myself to various parts of the state of Maine, but particularly to Piscataquis County, where the book is set. And I'm fascinated by the dynamics of the place, as you mentioned, the sort of from away versus local. The thing that really defines your sense of belonging is how deep and how many generations worth of ties you have to a given location, so that anybody who's not from the actual town is just from away. Like they could be from another planet. It doesn't even matter. Nobody cares because they're not local. So I've long been interested in the dynamics that rule small towns and in small rural areas. I think that they're kind of universal across the country. Anywhere you go, you tend to find that same dynamic. And it's very central to the book, this sense of belonging, and then what defines an outsider in a place where everybody has known everybody for their entire lives and maybe constructed certain ideas about who they are, that may or may not be accurate anymore as people grow and change. And then in terms of constructing the twist, so the first seed of this book actually was a song by the Mountain Goats called No Children, which recently enjoyed some like second, I guess maybe 10 years later, resurgence because it became popular on TikTok. All the youths discovered it. So, everyone has heard of it now, which is very exciting. But this song is about a really toxic marriage in which these two people have been together so long that they've not only destroyed their own lives, but they've basically poisoned their relationships with everybody who used to care about them. And I was really fascinated by the idea of that, how a couple becomes that. We've all read Gone Girl, obviously. We know that toxic marriages make for a great seed to start, writing a story about murder and chaos. So I started to try to imagine not only what would draw a couple together who were such a terrible match for each other, they could create something so poisonous, so toxic, but also how do they extricate themselves from a marriage like that? And I think that the answer is that somebody has to die.
Yes, otherwise, it's hard to write a mystery without a death, and and it certainly impels the story forward. So one of the things that we talk about a lot, in the mystery world, or I guess you would call it the crime writing world, is that it's a very big tent, and that different people occupy different corners of that big tent. And, we can't just put a book in a box and say, they're all mysteries, because, we have sort of light and dark and twisty and incredibly violent and historical and, all of these things going on at once, which I think, gives such richness to the world that we all occupy. We say, are you a crime writer? Yes. What do you write? And then you begin to talk about this. So I'm going to pop back to Reese for a moment and ask her about her dual protagonists and what it was like to work with those in a historical and a contemporary setting.
Yeah, this is the second book I've done in which I've done two timelines, and I find it was something that I love to read when you're seeing one person's story unfolding through another person's life. In a family with so many secrets in it that you didn't even know, and then you're given the slightest little clue, and you have to think, you follow this tiny clue, and it leads you to things you had no idea about. So I find that fascinating to do. To write is quite a challenge because you don't want to give away something in one time period that's happening in it too soon. You want someone to unfold something and not know about it already. You don't want to say, oh, well, 10 pages ago, we knew that in the past. So I'm dealing with the two stories, and then two women's very parallel lives. They're bound by blood, but they're also bound by similar fate in many ways. And what I wanted with this book was to show how one woman's story was completed by another woman's story. So the way to do it, to me, was to write both stories and then see where they fitted together. And the way to do that was, I have a very long hallway in my house in California, and I printed out all the pages and I walked down the hall thinking, we need to know this here, and putting them in between the chapters of the other one, which already lay on the floor. So if there'd been a large draft, there would have been a complete disaster for me. But I couldn't think of another way to do it, to make sure that we just learn at exactly the right moment what's going to happen in someone else's life. So I did it because I like the challenge, but also because to me, it's a very satisfying sort of read.
Thank you. I mean, I was going to ask if you had a wall all covered with stickies, just trying to imagine how you put that together, but a hallway. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So Sean, are you back with it? Unmute yourself again. There he
All
goes.
right.
Okay. When I think of your book, I think of it as being like a caper, in that there's a sort of a lighthearted way that they go about their violence, and yet it's an extraordinarily violent book. And I guess I would like you to talk to us a little bit about, the way that you envisioned those two fathers coming together, the accepting father and the not accepting father, and what brings them together, and then how that works out. So you can tell us what the story is.
Yeah. So basically, the story Raised by Tears is about two fathers, one black, one white, both ex-cons, whose sons are murdered. Their sons were married to each other. And so neither father really was very accepting of who their son was. And so when you talk about the violence in the story, both these men are men who are victims of tragic masculinity. These are men who don't understand how to communicate in a reasonable way. And so the violence in the beginning, especially, is just an outgrowth of their grief, their regret, and the way they understand the world. And as the book goes on, the violence becomes more pinpointed. It becomes more laser focused on the antagonists, on the people who hurt their children, as opposed to the world at large. And some of the humor is gallows humor. The two protagonists, Ike Randolph is an African-American man who owns his own business, a landscaping business, and Buddy Lee Jenkins, a white Southern man, both of these are Southerners, who's down on his luck. And so the way that we interact with them is the way they use a defense mechanism. For Ike, he's a very taciturn character. He doesn't like to talk a lot. And when he talks, he makes sure it counts. Buddy Lee is incredibly verbose. He jokes, he laughs, but all that is a defense mechanism to keep people at bay. But the one thing I try to do in my writing when it comes to violence is I really try hard to make the violence have consequences. In too many books that I read growing up, or too many books that you can read now, violence doesn't have consequences. Somebody gets shot in chapter 1, and by chapter 10, they're doing push-ups to clear their mind to figure out the mystery. And I wanted the violence to mean something. I wanted the violence to carry weight. And I wanted it to affect the protagonist as much as it affected the people they visit the violence upon. The thing about violence is it's unpredictable. You never know where it's going to go. Violence is like pulling one brick out of a dam, and you don't know what's going to happen. And so I wanted to kind of illustrate that in the book. Violence is not an answer. Violence is a confession of pain.
Okay, thank you. Because I like the writerly approach. I always think of, you say you have the brick. I think it's like you toss a pebble in a pond and you see where the ripples go. And a lot of times the books that we read don't acknowledge the ripples. And I think acknowledging the ripples is really what understanding violence and its impacts is all about. So, James, we actually you talked about your book and your idea and connecting the two towns, but you haven't yet told us what your book is about. So I think it would be really great if you could tell your listeners, our listeners, and the people who can't wait to read these books, what they're, that you've actually written a historical World War II police procedural.
Yeah, that's a good way of describing it. So 5 Decembers, the main character, Joe McGrady, is a Honolulu police detective, and he is sitting in a bar, as one does, after punching off work, and gets a call. His police captain has tracked him down and calls him and asks him to come back because there's been a double murder on the rural north shore of Oahu. So McGrady goes up there and finds the bodies, and one of them is a Caucasian young man, and the other one is a Japanese woman. And the Japanese woman is completely unidentifiable, but the man turns out to be the nephew of Admiral Husband Kimmel, who was then the commander of Pearl Harbor. And so because of the status of that victim, when McGrady uncovers clues that lead everybody to believe that the killer fled Oahu on the Pan Am Clipper flight that island hopped to Hong Kong, the local business community comes up with the cash to put him on the next flight out. So I should have started this all off with mentioning the timing here. So this happens on the book opens right around Thanksgiving 1941. So McGrady gets on the plane early December 1941, island hops and arrives at last in Hong Kong on December 7th, which was still December 6th in Hawaii because of the international dateline. So things go south the next day when World War II breaks out in the Pacific, and the Japanese are simultaneously attacking both Hong Kong and Hawaii. So McGrady ends up a prisoner of the Japanese and is shipped off to Tokyo, and manages to not only stay alive but to keep his investigation going while he's there. And I'll leave it at that so I don't spoil any of the things that were supposed to be surprising.
Except we could suggest that since the title is 5 Decembers, things happen which prevent him from, maybe getting home.
Yeah, well, World War II would definitely keep
it sort of
an American from
interferes with
getting
that,
out of
right.
Japan at all
Right.
in that time.
Okay. Will, how lucky you're with us now, right? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Good. Okay. Yes, ma'am. I like that. You must be
Sorry.
in the South.
It's a bad Midwestern habit. I apologize.
I still do it. I do it to people that I assume are older than I am, but I'm actually
Yeah,
older than everybody.
I did the
so.
exact.
So your character, just lead us into this story, because it's such a gentle book, and it's such a surprising book, and it's such a pleasure to to not be sort of slammed, but to be sort of gently led into this character that we're going to fall in love with. But tell us a little bit about, how it becomes a mystery.
Yeah. So listen, Daniel, the thing about Daniel's disease, spinal muscular atrophy, is that there is essentially a clock. He is 26 years old in the book, which is frankly a little bit past the age where I think he was expected to live, and frankly a little bit past where he personally expected to live. And so it hopefully adds a little poignancy to kind of everything that he goes through, but also adds to his perspective on things, and the idea that he feels like every moment must be kind of captured. Every moment needs to be lived to its fullest. And if there's an opportunity to do good or to help you, he feels obliged to do so, to kind of make his mark on the world. And so he witnesses basically a student at the university. He lives right off the campus of the University of Georgia, and he witnesses a student getting in a car. And then a couple of days later, it becomes very clear that this student has been abducted. There's a big campus-wide, all the TV stations come down to report on what's happened. And he realizes, oh, that's the person, that's what I saw. That's what I need to do something. What can I do? And the book, in a lot of ways, is, listen, the hopefully the book is suspenseful. Hopefully the book has a lot of the aspects that we consider of a thriller or mystery or so on. But it's very funny because, again, I had Daniel first. I knew who Daniel was first, and tried and figured out where he would go from there. And I really felt like putting in the character work for him, and getting to know, letting Daniel spend a lot of time explaining just on a day-to-day basis what his life is like, what his relationship with his friends are, how he kind of got to this point. And so therefore it's funny. One of my dirty secrets about this is I was unfamiliar with the term cozy mystery. I never heard of that before until this. I wrote this. I never heard of it. Forgive me.
Oh my God, you wrote a cozy?
I hope not. I don't know. That's the thing. I really don't know what these things are. And I don't mean any offense to anyone who likes them or reads them. I just literally, this is my dirty secret, is I kind of wrote this book. I wrote it completely on spec. My agent did not even know I was working on it. And then one day I met him for dinner right before the pandemic started. And like I was in an 80s movie, and I was I printed it all out and handed it to him. He's like, well, I'm glad you had your big dramatic moment, but now I got to carry this crap around with me all night. I'm like, don't worry, I'll just email. I'll email it to you tomorrow. I can do it the traditional way. I just wanted to have my moment. And so because of that, to be honest, I did not actually have any idea whether this would be considered a thriller or a character study or any, I had not considered it, what shelf it was supposed to go on. It was funny because when we kind of pitched it around, everyone liked it, but they're like, wait, is it a thriller? Is it a so on? So it's funny, if you were to read the book, literally the first line of the book is, my life is not a thriller. It was literally just a way to signal, listen, get that out of your mind. Don't do that. And of course, guess what happened? The minute you put that as the first line, everyone's like, oh, it's a thriller. Okay, I understand what it is now. So, which I think was kind of a funny way to go about it. So I know that there are aspects of the book, and clearly there are harrowing moments. It is an intense experience that he goes through because he's unable to speak. He's unable to really communicate. He's unable to really function physically. But I also, I feel like the story is Daniel's story and kind of his progression, where he goes, and the people that he helps and the people that are able to help him. And the scary thriller part of it are things that definitely happen, and it's in there. But and hopefully it's not. There are moments that are totally uncozy. They lack cozy. I don't want any. I don't want too much coziness.
You don't. I'm going to give you a word. You do not have to say cozy anymore. You can say traditional.
Okay,
because that's an amateur protagonist.
Okay,
and
fair enough.
It's also a buddy book because he's got a sidekick.
Yeah. He does have a sidekick. He does. Okay, so good. I'm glad to know where in the shelf it goes, because I never know. So just tell me where it goes, and I'll put it there.
We never know, and they never know. So, Kat, unmute yourself here. I know that it's very difficult for you to talk about your book because it is so twisty. But tell us the beginning, the protagonist, the situation, the small town girl who can do no right.
Yeah, so it's not a spoiler to tell you that the protagonist of my book is named Lizzie Willette, and as soon as you meet her on the first page, she is already dead. So she's narrating, telling her story from beyond the grave. At the same time as interspersed with her story is the perspective chapters from the detective Ian Bird, who's investigating her murder, and another woman, Adrienne Richards, who is tied to Lizzie and to her death in ways that I cannot talk about. But yeah, the book opens on a beautiful, sunny autumn morning in rural Copper Falls, Maine, and the town junkyard is on fire. And in a lovely Airbnb rental by the lake is Lizzie Willette, dead with her face not to be insensitive, but blown off on the bedroom floor. Yeah, when I spoke to, I consulted with a state trooper from upstate New York who gave me insight into how how murders are investigated in places that have a police force so small that they don't have like a designated investigative team for it on their own. The state cops will come in, and I was asking him about some of the more grisly stuff that he had seen, and he described a victim that he'd seen as her face looked like cherry pie, and that really stuck with me. I ended up making it into the book. So yeah, at the very start of the book, you have a dead body, a woman who was sort of the town pariah. Everyone has a complicated relationship with her, although now that she's dead, they're sort of writing these macabre things on her Facebook wall, like, oh, hello, like, hope you're having fun in heaven, stay sweet. And her husband is missing, which of course inspires a lot of suspicion on the part of the detective investigating, because it's always the husband, right? So from there things unfold in unexpected ways. There's a cat involved in the book, and yeah, would you take him? Thanks. Sorry about that.
That's actually it turns out that we might have, if I didn't know what your book was about, I'd say you must be writing a cozy, right? Because
yeah,
it was right?
Yeah. Well, there was a great shock to everybody, including me and my publisher, when briefly the book was ranking on Amazon in cozy animal mysteries. There's only one cat in the book, and nothing good happens to him. So hopefully people
not
were
allowed
warned.
to. Okay, well, it's good to warn people. They should probably have cats with little crosses, stickers to put on the book jackets, so that they can warn people off who get upset about these things.
Yeah,
So
I should add that, of course,
question here.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say I should add that in like the first 50 pages of the book, or even 30 pages, somebody pulls a severed nose out of a garbage disposal, but people were more upset about the cat. So I don't know what that says about everyone's priorities.
Well, yes. I mean, we are much more upset by bad things that happen to animals than we are bad things that happen to humans, particularly in the mystery genre or the crime writing genre. So I have a note here from Kathy saying, I was supposed to remind our listeners that if you have a question for any of our panelists, or for all of our panelists that you would like to ask, put it in the Q&A or put it in the chat box, and we will pass it along to them. Because we would love to know what, people are thinking. Okay. Can't see anything on this. Hold on. Oh, we do have a question for Will. I love this. Okay. The question for Will is, Rear Window is my favorite movie. How were you inspired to change some of the concepts of your voyeur sleuth?
Yeah, I love Rear Window as well. And it's weird. Like, I consider the Rear Window plot almost like the Groundhog Day plot. Like, it's almost a genre to itself at this point, right? Like, someone witnesses something, and the person that does the thing doesn't see them, and they have to kind of operate in darkness in a lot of ways. That feels in the same way that, like, basically Groundhog Day is now like, hey, there's Groundhog Day where Tom Cruise is an action star. There's Groundhog Day where there's a horror movie, and there's Groundhog Day, like that. People say, like, it's a Groundhog Day homage. No, it's Groundhog Day is basically just a genre at this point. I feel like Rear Window is that kind of as well. And certainly it doesn't follow to any stretch, How Lucky to any stretch of the imagination does not follow the arc
No.
of Rear Window in any way, shape, or form. And I would argue that I think Daniel is a little nicer actually than Jimmy Stewart's character is in that movie. You know, I think that there is, but I do think that there's to be able to play with the idea and to play with the notion of what it means to see something and have the person that you saw the thing do not know that you were there. And I think it speaks to something too about Daniel. One of the things that Daniel talks about a lot in the book is when you kind of have the severe disability that he has. And this is something I got talking to many, many people that, again, that have SMA or family members of SMA. People don't see you. Like they see you for a second and then they try not to look. And so because of that, it makes him very kind of invisible, and therefore he becomes very observant about things because no one's looking at them, and therefore he can see them in moments that are essentially unguarded. And so that I thought was a way to kind of play with the idea. But the Rear Window, I feel like an homage to Rear Window. I feel like every great plot is an homage to Hitchcock, really, in a certain kind of level. So I think that Rear Window is one of the. I'm more of a Vertigo person, to be entirely honest. Vertigo is probably my strike zone, but certainly I think that's kind of the idea.
Right. So, Kathy, I have another question here, but what's our timing? Oh, Kathy has gone completely invisible here. Well, we'll just start and she'll stop. She says I can keep going. Okay. I have another question here, which I think is fun. But since I read your bios, everybody should know the answer to this one already. Is just, what did each of you do before becoming a novelist, and do you have a day job? And I guess we'll go down, you know, we'll start with Sean and we'll just bounce around.
I had a lot of jobs before I was a writer. I was bad at all of them. Writing is the only thing I'm really good at. I was a bouncer. I was a retail manager. I was a funeral home assistant. I was a mate on a charter boat. I was a construction worker. And for 8 hours before I quit, I was a mascot for a national fast food chain that will remain nameless in the world's hottest costume. So I've done a lot of different jobs, but writing is the only one that I've ever had any affinity for.
Well, it seems to suit you. Reese?
Well, apparently I've been a writer all my life. My first paid writing job, I suppose, I was working in London for the BBC. I went right straight from college into BBC, and I was in BBC drama, and I was I'd work on plays, and I'd think to myself, if I'd written this play, I wouldn't have ended it this way. So I went home and I wrote a play, and with the bravado of a 22-year-old, I walked down the hall to the head of drama and I said, I've written this play. And about a week or so later, he called me in and he said, yeah, we really like this. We're going to do it. So I've actually been a published writer since then. And I was at a college reunion a few years ago, and a woman said to me, so have you ever had a proper job? And I said, well, no, but my improper job has paid off 2 houses and put four kids through college. So no, I haven't had a proper job for many, many years.
And have you been asked when you're going to write a real book?
Oh, often, yes. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I was asked I was on one of my, you get all these radio interviews and things. And one said, so how would you compare yourself to a literary novelist?
Oh.
So I said, oh, well, let me just give you an example. I want you to picture myself and a literary novelist, and we're walking up a flight of steps next to each other, and we're going into a bank, and one of us is smiling.
I know who that was. That's great. What about you, James? You do have a day job,
yeah.
right?
So
you've had lots of day jobs.
I have always wanted to be a novelist, and so the struggle was to figure out how to fund myself until money started coming in from books. So I have been a whitewater raft guide. I was once a counselor at a Texas reform camp for juvenile sex offenders. I got a book out of that one. And I was a kindergarten teacher in Taiwan. I owned a bar in Taiwan. and also probably Taiwan's first Mexican restaurant. And my current cover is I'm sort of camping out as a lawyer until the book money comes in. So, but yeah, I've always wanted to write. I could probably quit and write now, except that I have discovered in the last 6 years that kids are really, really expensive, and so the price for quitting my day job has gone way up.
Will, what about you?
Yeah, so I work as a journalist. As a journalist, I've worked at New York Magazine for 15 years now, which is a bit absurd. I've gone from being like the young, exciting, hot blogger to the really, really old guy that everyone thinks is doing everything wrong, which I guess is probably the way it works. But my job before this was that lowly scum job of a blogger. So once I grew past that, there's terrible ways. And but yeah, I'm a writer. I work as a journalist. I would argue that a lot of the things that made How Lucky work and got the details of, frankly, writing about a disability and affliction that I don't have is by doing the journalistic legwork and talking to as many people as possible. So I still write. You can still find my work all over New York Magazine, and I also write for Major League Baseball. So it's opening day on Thursday. So you'll see a lot of stuff from me on MLB.com. I'd like to pretend that I only care about novels, but I'm going to watch so much baseball on Thursday, and I can't wait.
Yes, well, I can think of a lovely book title, which would be Joe's Last Opening Day.
Yes.
And there he goes. It's the end. Kat, what about you?
So like Will, I also moonlight as a journalist and a culture writer. I similarly see that plus fiction writing as sort of two sides of the same coin. I like to approach the same questions in both sides of my work, just from different angles. I also currently work as a yoga instructor at some studios nearby. It gets me out of the house and out of my head, which is nice. Prior to becoming a writer, I spent a few years working as a publicist and did not figure out that I was the worst publicist in the world before my bosses did. So that was unfortunate. Was not good at that job. So I'm very, very glad that I have this one now.
Very good. So I have a question which is for all of you, and you can just sort of, we don't have buttons, but we'll figure it out. How much do you consult law enforcement and try to make your work believable versus how much do you rely on your own imagination and intuition? And then the in parentheses, in other words, which takes precedence, realism or suspense? And I think that's actually a global research question. Do you research it and try to make it as real as possible, or do you imagine it sometimes? And you can start, because you said you talked with police, not Maine police, but go ahead.
I like to say that, nobody should use my novel as a handbook for solving crimes, and hopefully nobody is. I make my excuses in the acknowledgments where, if I had to invent something or, if I messed something up, that's on me. I like to consult subject matter experts just to get a sense for how things unfold so that it at least follows the same pattern of an investigation. And I was very gratified to find out when I was talking to my law enforcement source. I had a lot of questions about, how would you go about questioning somebody if you suspected somebody was involved with a crime? Would you call them on the phone to tell them that you thought they were involved, or would you just go to their house and knock on their door? And my instinct was that I would go to their house and knock on their door, and then I felt like I would make such a great detective because my source was like, oh yeah, I would just go to their house and knock on the door. I would surprise the hell out of them, and I was like, yes, I'm going to be a police officer. I'm not going to be a police officer, but I was really excited for a hot second.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. Anybody else want to weigh in on the question?
Yeah, I do just enough research so that my editor doesn't get mad at me. I think I don't like to bog down the story in too many arcane details. There's in Reese Tears, there's a lot of shooting, and I usually just say they used a gun, or I say they shot a shotgun. I don't want to get bogged down in the minutia of a difference between a PPK Walther versus a Heckler and Koch. But As far as legal stuff goes, I have a couple friends who are retired police officers, and I asked them some questions, about procedure and stuff like that. But if it sounds like it's going to get in the way of the story, then I jettison it and move on to something else.
Anybody else?
Yeah,
Well,
go ahead, please.
No, please go ahead. Please go ahead, Will. No.
I would much rather listen to you, I assure you.
I was going to say, I don't. This is not in any way really a traditional mystery, because there's no murder, there's no sleuth. It's just an unfolding of one life through a person with another life. But I think if you're writing historical, everything has to be right, because you're giving a real place and a real time. You just happen to put fictitious people into that real place and real time. So it really behoves you that every single detail, and especially if I'm writing about Venice, I can't get anything wrong. Someone's going to say to me, you said that coffee shop was on this corner. No, it's not. It's on another corner, because it's all there still, So I do lots of research for all my books, because I want someone to say, oh, that's right. In my Molly Murphy series, which takes place in New York in the early 1900s, I get so many letters saying, oh, I was born in that part of Greenwich Village, and I love the fact that she goes to this bakery that my grandmother used to go to. That makes me feel really good that I've done my research properly.
Yeah, I will say that I live in fear of the 3 a.m. anonymous emails from people who are like, you, sir, do not understand concrete. And I have a PhD in material sciences. And I get those, and I didn't want too many of them for 5 Decembers. So after I finished writing the book, I continued doing research, and I researched right up until my editor told me the book had gone to print. And then I stopped. But hopefully I caught most of them.
Yeah. Well, Sean, they told me years ago that you can get anything wrong except trains and guns. And if you get anything wrong, anything wrong with a train or a gun, you're going to get millions of people saying, you said that gun was a certain, well, actually that one, you don't load it that way, so it's very sensible to just have a gun as opposed to specifics.
Yes, I have a T-shirt that says there is no safety on a Glock. Yeah.
And I would say for mine, again, I'm writing, like, I do not have spinal muscular atrophy. So there are millions of people who do. So the idea that I've had a lot of people that have read the book. I've been involved with Cure SMA, the big spinal muscular atrophy charity, and a lot of people have read the book and said, wow, that have SMA or have some sort of disability, they'll read the book and be like, every time I read a book about someone with disability, I sit there and I'm like, well, they're going to get this wrong. I know they're going to get this wrong. What this idiot? And this never happened. And they said it never happened with your book. How did you do that? And I'm like, because I showed it to a bunch of people who are looking to do the exact same thing that you're doing right now, and they told me what I got wrong, and I fixed it. And like that, to me, it's just the journalism idea. But I in particular, I could not get stuff wrong when it came to this, because there's a level of credibility that I frankly don't have inherently, that I feel like I have to kind of earn.
Right. And I think that for all of us, doing our research, doing our homework, keeps us from getting too many nasty emails, so, which is always nice. So at this point, I think, even though we've got more questions and we could probably go on for another hour, I think we've pretty much had our hour. I really appreciate those of you who showed up to listen to these writers. I really appreciate these writers for giving us 5 fabulous books. I have one last question for all 5 of you, and it's almost like a one-word answer, and that is this: where were you when you learned that you were an Edgar's finalist?
Well, I always start the day opening my emails and reading my emails in bed like 6:30 in the morning, and I sort of read down, Edgar Awards, and I read down the word, and but then I saw I had an email from my friend Louise Penny, and so before I went through to read the Edgar Awards, I said, what's Louise saying today? And it starts off, holy shit, woman. So then I found out.
Great way to start the day. How about the rest of you, Will?
I was about to go on a run, and my editor called me. And one of the jokes I have with my editor is, the pandemic, for everybody had a hard time with the pandemic for all sorts of reasons. But my dirty secret, probably because I've worked at home since 2005, is I really like getting dressed up for things. Like I really, really like it. So my editor called me. It's like, hey, I have good news for you. You have a reason to get dressed up. And so I was like, good, that'll work. That'll work. What is it? I was like, oh, that's great too. But mostly I was just so excited to have an excuse to not wear running clothes, because that's what I've been doing for 2 years.
Kat, how about you?
I don't remember where I was. I just remember that my mother called me screaming. I picked the phone and it was just like this high pitched. Ah! So that was, that was my
so
first
nice.
insight.
John?
Oh, I was at the gym. I had just failed on a deadlift that I had tried in vain to pull off the floor. And I was kind of in a bad mood. And one of my good friends, a writer named Nikki Dolson, texted me. It's like, have you been on Twitter this morning? And I was like, no, I'm at the gym. And she's like, you should go on Twitter. And I was kind of frustrated. I'm like, I'm not going on Twitter. I'm going to try to get this personal deadlift record here. And she said, you got nominated for an Edgar. Whatever's going on, it's going to be all right. So that's how I found out.
I'm sorry, I gotta know how many pounds the deadlift was.
450.
Have you seen this guy?
Wait, that's ounces, right? That's ounces is what that is?
Yeah, 450 ounces.
Congratulations. That's twice my ounce record. Congratulations.
James?
I was in bed, and because
that's right, you're way in Hawaii.
Yeah, I live in Hawaii, so I typically get a bunch of emails from my editor and agent at like 3:30 in the morning. And so over the past 6 years or so, I've kind of developed this weird habit where I wake up around 3:30 and check my phone to see if anything has changed in my life. And so I checked it, and I actually saw a Twitter notification from a friend of mine on Twitter that I read before the emails from my agent and my editor. So I found out that way. And then I went back to sleep.
Well, that's a good, I don't think I'd be able to go back to sleep. So I just want to remind those of you who are out there in listening world, and that the conversation with the best first novel panelist is going to be Thursday night at 7. And that's going to be really fun. And you should all be there. And I will see you guys, I hope, at the Edgars.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
And congratulations. They are
Thank you.
fabulous
Thank
books.
See you
Thank
all
you so
soon.
much.
Yeah,
Be safe.
love you. Thanks. Bye.